Chosen one, pay attention. Nobody in that room expected what happened next. Not the ones who spent months tearing your name apart behind closed doors. Not the ones who smiled at you Tuesday and mocked you Wednesday. Not even the people who thought they had you figured out down to the last detail. They expected tears. They expected begging. They expected the version of you that shrinks, apologizes for existing, and quietly disappears so everyone else can go back to feeling comfortable. That is what they were counting on. That is what they built their whole plan around. And that is exactly why what actually happened hit them like a freight train with no brakes. Because you didn't beg. You didn't explain yourself for the 100th time. You didn't chase anyone down demanding an apology. You did something so much colder, so much sharper, so much more devastating than anything they prepared for. You let it unfold, slowly, precisely, without raising your voice once. And now the same people who laughed about you in group chats are sitting in silence, staring at their phones, watching their own story collapse in real time, wondering how the quiet one they underestimated became the reason their whole world is on fire. This is not a story about yelling. This is not a story about petty paybacks or dramatic confrontations in parking lots. This is something else entirely. This is the kind of reversal that doesn't need witnesses to be brutal. It just needs time. And time, chosen one, was the one thing they never thought to fear. While they were busy congratulating themselves on getting away with it, the clock was already working against them. Every lie they told was a debt. Every person they hurt was a receipt. And receipts, once they start piling up, they don't ask for permission before they come due. People keep asking how someone this quiet, this composed, this seemingly unbothered, could end up being the reason an entire circle of people fell apart. They're asking the wrong question. The right question isn't how you did it. It's why they ever believed you couldn't. They mistook your patience for passivity. They mistook your peace for permission. And somewhere in that miscalculation, they built an entire version of you that never actually existed. One that would keep absorbing whatever they threw, forever, without consequence. That version was always fiction. What's happening now is just reality catching up to the fiction they preferred. Before we go further, if this is already hitting somewhere real, hit that like button and subscribe. Not for me, for the mission. Every one of you who does that is another signal sent into the algorithm that says this story matters, that this message needs to keep reaching the people who are still sitting in silence, wondering if their turn is coming. Because it is. Now let's get into exactly how brutal this got, and why nobody, not even you, fully understood how far it would go. Number 1. The revenge that never needed your permission to begin. Here's the part they still don't understand, even now, even after everything unraveled in front of their own eyes. You never planned this. You never sat in a room somewhere plotting their downfall hour by hour. You didn't need to. Because real consequence doesn't work like a movie script where the wronged party stands in the rain delivering a monologue before burning it all down. Real consequence is quieter than that. It moves through cause and effect, through pattern and pressure, through the simple, unglamorous fact that people who build their lives on lies eventually run out of places to hide them. You just stopped participating. That was the whole move. You stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped performing your innocence for people who had already decided not to believe you no matter what you said. And in that silence, something happened that they never predicted. Without you in the room to blame, without you available to absorb the tension, all of it had nowhere to go except back onto them. Imagine a pressure valve that's been venting onto one person for years, and then one day that person simply steps aside. The pressure doesn't disappear, it just finds a new target, and this time, that target is them. They mistook your absence for defeat. They told each other you'd gone quiet because you had nothing left, no fight, no comeback, no leg to stand on. What they didn't realize is that silence, when it comes from someone who has stopped needing their approval, is not surrender. It's a closed door. And closed doors have a way of making people panic, because suddenly they can't read the room anymore. They can't predict your next move because you stopped making moves for their benefit entirely. Think of it like pulling a single card from the bottom of a tower everyone assumed was stable. Nothing collapses instantly. There's a pause, a wobble, a moment where it looks like maybe it will hold. And then, piece by piece, the whole structure they built on your compliance starts to shift, crack, and finally come down. Not because you pushed it, but because it was never actually stable to begin with. You just stopped being the thing propping it up. This is why what's happening to them right now feels so unbearable. There's no villain to point at, no single dramatic moment to blame, just the slow, undeniable math of consequences finally landing. They ask each other, how did this happen so fast? It didn't happen fast. It happened the moment you decided their approval was no longer worth performing for. Everything since then has just been physics, and physics doesn't care how sorry they are now. Ask yourself honestly, chosen one, how many times did you rehearse the version of events you'd give if anyone ever asked? How many nights did you lie awake building the perfect explanation, just in case? None of that was wasted, but notice something important. You never actually had to deliver it. The moment never came where you needed to defend yourself, because the truth stopped requiring your defense the second you stopped supplying the material they needed to keep twisting it. That's not an accident. That's what happens when you stop handing someone the rope they've been using against you. Number 2, the silence they mistook for surrender, and why it was actually the trigger. Let's talk about what silence really does to people who are used to controlling a narrative. For people who thrive on managing perception, on shaping how a room sees them, silence from the one person they wronged is the single most disorienting thing that can happen. They expect a reaction, because reactions are something they know how to manage. They can spin a reaction. They can twist your anger into, look how unstable they are. They can turn your tears into, see, I told you they were dramatic. What they cannot spin is nothing at all. You gave them nothing. No fight to distort, no outburst to screenshot, no messy moment to hold up as proof they were right about you all along. And in that vacuum, something started happening that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. People started asking questions, not because you asked them to, because absence creates curiosity, and curiosity, once it starts digging, rarely stops at the surface. Why haven't they said anything? Turned into, wait, what actually happened? Which turned into people quietly going back through old conversations, old messages, old moments they'd brushed past the first time. Picture a lake that looks perfectly calm on the surface, while something enormous moves beneath it. That was your silence. Still on top, seismic underneath. They kept waiting for the surface to break, for you to finally crack and give them the scene they needed to justify everything they'd done. It never came. And the longer it didn't come, the more that stillness started to look like something else entirely. Not weakness, not defeat, confidence. And confidence from someone they'd spent months trying to convince the world was falling apart is the kind of detail people notice. Here's the part that really got them. Silence doesn't just protect you from being misquoted or twisted. It removes their access to your reactions as raw material. Every time you used to respond, defend, explain, you were unknowingly handing them footage for their movie. The second you stopped, that supply dried up completely. They had built an entire narrative around your emotional responses, and without new material, that narrative started running on fumes, repeating itself, sounding thinner and less convincing every time they told it. That's when the questions turned sharper. That's when the people who used to nod along started exchanging glances instead. That's when the story that once felt airtight started developing holes nobody could patch fast enough. You didn't do any of that on purpose in the dramatic, calculated way they imagine now when they try to make sense of it. You just stopped feeding a fire that was never yours to keep burning. And a fire with no fuel does exactly what fires without fuel always do. It burns out, and it takes down whoever was standing too close. There's a specific kind of person who cannot function without an audience reacting to them, and that dependency, once you understand it, explains almost everything about what happened next. Without your reaction to perform against, they had nowhere to direct their energy except inward, and inward is exactly where scrutiny is hardest for people who've spent years managing how they look to everyone else. You didn't take anything from them. You simply stopped supplying the one thing their entire performance depended on. And performances without an audience have a way of exposing exactly how thin the script always was. Number 3, the receipts you never had to show because the truth showed itself. There's a specific kind of panic that sets in when someone realizes the proof against them was never in your hands to begin with. It was in theirs the entire time, written in every message they sent, every person they told a slightly different version of events, every small inconsistency they never thought anyone would bother lining up side by side. You didn't need a folder of screenshots. You didn't need to build a case. You just needed patience, and the simple fact that liars, given enough time, always eventually contradict themselves. Think about how exhausting it is to maintain a lie across dozens of conversations, months, sometimes years. One version for this person, a softer version for that one, a completely different framing for the people who might actually push back. For a while, that juggling act works, because most people don't compare notes. But all it takes is two people who trusted the same liar finally sitting down and talking to each other, and the entire structure falls apart in minutes. That conversation was never something you had to orchestrate. It was inevitable the moment enough people started asking the same quiet question: does this actually add up? Imagine someone building a house of cards in a room with the windows cracked open, convinced the air is still. They don't feel the draft building, they don't notice the corner card trembling, and then one ordinary afternoon, without warning, the whole thing folds in on itself, and they're left standing there, asking what happened, when the answer was always the same draft that had been moving through the room the entire time. This is what makes it feel brutal to them, even though nothing about it was engineered by you. It feels personal because it's inescapable. There's no one to argue with, no single accuser to discredit, no villain in the story they can point to and say, this is all their fault. Just their own words, spoken in different rooms to different people, finally landing next to each other for the first time. And words, once they're compared, don't lie the way people do. You didn't need to prove anything. You needed the truth to stop being managed, and the moment you stepped back from managing it for them, out of exhaustion, out of self-protection, out of simply refusing to carry their narrative anymore, the truth did what it always does when nobody's holding it down. It surfaced. Slowly at first, then all at once. And now they're left trying to explain contradictions they created themselves to people who are no longer inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. Notice, too, that none of the people comparing notes were doing it as a favor to you. They weren't building a case on your behalf. They were simply protecting themselves from being the next person fed a version of events that didn't hold up. That's the quiet part nobody talks about. Liars don't just risk exposure from the person they lied about. They risk it from everyone else they've ever lied to, because sooner or later, those people talk to each other too, and none of them owed you anything to start that conversation. They just wanted to know what was actually true. Number 4, the moment your calm stopped looking like weakness and started looking like a warning. There's a specific shift that happens in a room when someone realizes the person they've been underestimating isn't actually rattled. You've felt it, that flicker in someone's eyes when they expected you to flinch and you simply didn't. Early on, they read your calm as proof they were winning. If you're not reacting, you must not have anything to react with, right? That was the story they told themselves, because it was convenient and because it let them keep going without examining what they were actually doing. But calm sustained over time stops looking like an absence of ammunition and starts looking like something far more unsettling: control. People who are actually losing tend to show it eventually. They crack under the strain of pretending everything's fine. You never cracked, not because nothing hurt, but because you'd already decided their reaction to your pain wasn't going to be the thing that defined this chapter of your life. And that decision, quiet as it was, changed the entire temperature of the situation. Picture two people playing a game where one keeps making aggressive, showy moves, certain that volume equals dominance, while the other simply keeps making small, correct moves without any fanfare at all. For a while, the loud player feels like they're winning because they're the only one making noise. Then, somewhere around the middle of the board, they look up and realize the quiet player has been building a position the entire time, one they can no longer escape. That's what your calm was doing, while they mistook it for surrender. Somewhere along the way, the people around them started noticing the contrast too. Loud accusations followed by nothing but composed silence in return don't read as guilt, they read as restraint. And restraint, held long enough in the face of provocation, starts to look like someone who knows exactly what they're doing and simply isn't in a hurry. That contrast alone did more damage to their credibility than any argument you could have made out loud. This is the part that unsettles them most now, if you ask the people who know them well. It's not that you eventually said something devastating, it's that you never needed to raise your voice at all. The stillness itself became the warning, because anyone paying close attention understood exactly what it meant. This is a person who is no longer negotiating for your understanding and no longer performing distress for your comfort. That kind of calm doesn't ask to be taken seriously. It simply is, whether they're ready for it or not. You might wonder why that unsettles people more than anger ever could. Anger gives them something to respond to, a reason to call you unreasonable, a moment to point at and say, "See, this is who they really are." Calm gives them nothing to work with. There's no outburst to circulate, no meltdown to screenshot, no moment of weakness to hold up as proof they were right all along. All they're left with is the uncomfortable question of why someone they hurt this badly isn't behaving the way they expected. And that question, once it takes root, is far harder to shake than any accusation you could have thrown at them directly. Number 5. Every apology that came too late to change anything. There's a particular kind of apology that shows up only once consequences are already visible, and everyone in the room can tell the difference between remorse and damage control. You've probably already received one of these. The message that starts with, "I never meant for things to get this bad," or "I feel like there's been a misunderstanding," instead of anything resembling actual accountability. These apologies aren't for you. They never were. They're an attempt to get ahead of a story that's already writing itself without their input. A last effort to control something that stopped being theirs, to control the moment they lost your trust. Notice the timing. Nobody sends that message while things are going well for them. Nobody reaches out to make peace while they're still winning. The apology only appears once the room has shifted, once other people have started asking questions, once the version of events they built has begun collapsing under its own contradictions. That timing tells you everything you need to know about what the apology is actually for. It isn't remorse arriving late, it's strategy arriving desperate. Imagine someone who spent months letting a house catch fire standing outside admiring the flames, and then the second the fire department shows up, they start shouting about how they always cared about the house. Nobody watching believes that performance, least of all the people who watch them light the first match. That's what a late apology looks like to everyone standing close enough to have seen the whole thing unfold. You don't owe anyone a response to an apology built on timing instead of truth. You're allowed to notice that it arrived exactly when it became useful to them, and not a moment before. You're allowed to recognize the difference between someone who's sorry for what they did and someone who's sorry they got caught doing it. And you're allowed to treat those two things completely differently, because they are not the same, no matter how similar the words sound on the surface. This is part of what makes the reversal feel so complete to the people watching from outside. They watched the silence. They watched the truth surface on its own. And now they're watching the apology land flat, because everyone in that room already knows what it actually is. Not remorse. Relief that maybe, if they say the right thing now, they can still salvage something from a story that's already been told without them. You're also allowed to notice what the apology leaves out. Real accountability names the thing plainly. It doesn't hide behind, "if I hurt you," or "for whatever happened between us." Language built to sound gracious, while admitting nothing specific at all. That vagueness isn't an accident either. Naming the exact thing they did would mean confronting it directly, and people who are managing damage instead of feeling remorse will almost always choose the version of sorry that keeps the details blurry, because blurry details are so much easier to walk back later if they need to. Number 6. The people who switched sides overnight and why it changed nothing for them. You've probably noticed them by now. The ones who said absolutely nothing while you were being torn apart, who watched from a safe distance and called it staying neutral, and who are now suddenly liking your posts and mentioning how they always had a feeling something was off. It's remarkable how quickly loyalty appears once it becomes safe. It's even more remarkable how completely absent it was when it actually would have cost them something. Here's what's important to understand about that shift. It has nothing to do with growth, and everything to do with self-preservation. When the spotlight moved close enough to make silence look like complicity, they didn't suddenly develop a conscience. They developed a fear of being associated with the losing side. That's not loyalty. That's timing, dressed up as principle, and the difference matters because one of those things deserves your trust and the other one has already told you exactly how far it's willing to go when things actually get difficult. Picture a group of people standing near someone who's being pelted with rocks, none of them stepping in, all of them looking away and calling it neutrality. Then someone with real influence walks over and asks who's responsible, and suddenly the same people who never moved are holding out their hands, insisting they were trying to help the whole time. Nobody who actually watched it happen is fooled by that performance, and neither should you be. You're allowed to notice who stayed and who disappeared. You're allowed to remember who reached out during the hardest part and who only resurfaced once it became socially convenient. That memory isn't bitterness, it's information, and information like that is exactly what protects you from handing your trust back to people who've already shown you they'll hand you over the second it costs them anything. The brutal part for them is watching you not need their comeback story. You've already built whatever you needed to build without their support, and their sudden reappearance doesn't fill a gap, because there was no gap left for them to fill. That's the real consequence they didn't see coming. Not rejection, not confrontation, just quiet irrelevance, watching from the outside as life moves forward without requiring their approval or their apology to keep going. There's a particular sting in that kind of ending, sharper in some ways than an argument would have been. An argument at least acknowledges that someone still matters enough to fight with. Irrelevance doesn't offer even that. It just moves forward, indifferent, uninterested in relitigating a chapter that's already closed. That's the part they weren't prepared for. They imagined you either forgiving them or hating them, some strong emotional reaction they could still respond to. What they got instead was something far quieter and far more final, you simply moving on, with or without their return. Number 7. The room that used to laugh, and why it goes quiet the second your name comes up now. Think back to the version of this story where your name was something people felt safe joking about, where mentioning you got an easy laugh, an eye roll, a knowing look shared between people who thought they understood exactly who you were. That room doesn't exist anymore, and the people who used to fill it with that particular kind of noise have gone very, very quiet. It's a strange thing, watching a joke stop landing. At first, they probably tried it anyway, out of habit, testing whether the old dynamic still worked. And it didn't, because the context around your name had shifted so completely that the joke didn't sound clever anymore. It sounded cruel, or worse, it sounded like something that might come back on the person telling it. Nobody wants to be remembered as the one who kept laughing after the story changed. Imagine a comedian who's been telling the same bit for years, always getting a reaction, and one night the room simply doesn't respond the way it used to. No boos, no confrontation, just silence. The kind that tells you something in the air has changed, even if nobody says it out loud. That's what happened to every conversation that used to include your name as the punchline. The material didn't change, the room did. That shift didn't happen because you demanded it. It happened because enough people quietly reevaluated what they'd been part of. And once that reevaluation starts, it doesn't reverse easily. People don't like feeling implicated in something they're only now understanding the full shape of. And the fastest way to distance themselves from that discomfort is to simply stop participating in it, silently, without ever having to admit out loud that they were wrong. That silence in rooms you're not even in anymore is one of the most brutal parts of this whole reversal, because it means the damage isn't something you're doing. It's something happening on its own, in spaces you'll never see, among people you may never speak to again. The story is finishing itself without your involvement, and there's a particular kind of finality in that, the kind that doesn't need a final confrontation to feel complete. Some of them will try to rewrite it, of course. There will be versions floating around where the silence gets reframed as, "We all just grew apart," or "Things got complicated," language soft enough to avoid saying what actually happened. Let them have that version if it helps them sleep. It doesn't change what the people closest to the situation already know, and it doesn't undo the very specific, very real moment when the laughter stopped and nobody in that room could quite explain why, even to themselves. Number 8. Why precision, not volume, is what actually took them down. People confuse brutal with loud. They imagine devastating consequences arriving with shouting, dramatic confrontations, public call-outs delivered with maximum theater. That's not what happened here, and that's exactly why it hit as hard as it did. What actually took them apart wasn't noise. It was precision, the same kind of precision a surgeon uses instead of a sledgehammer. Exact, unhurried, and impossible to argue with once it's done. Loud reactions can be dismissed. They can be framed as overreactions, as drama, as proof that the person reacting is unstable. Precision cannot be dismissed the same way, because there's nothing messy to point at. A calm statement of fact, delivered once, without embellishment, is far harder to discredit than an emotional outburst, no matter how justified that outburst might be. You understood that, maybe not consciously, maybe just instinctively, and it's the reason nothing about how this unfolded gave them anything to twist. Picture two ways of cutting down a tree. One person swings wildly, missing half the time, exhausting themselves, making a huge mess that takes weeks to clean up. The other studies exactly where to cut, makes a handful of precise strokes, and steps back as the whole thing comes down cleanly, in one motion, exactly where it was aimed. The second method doesn't look as dramatic in the moment. It's far more effective, and it leaves nothing behind for anyone to salvage. That's the version of this that actually happened. No dramatic scene, no viral meltdown, just quiet, accurate truth, delivered without excess, allowed to do the only thing truth ever needs to do once it's finally free to move, land exactly where it belongs. And once it landed, there was nothing left to argue, because arguing with precision requires finding the flaw in it, and there wasn't one to find. This is why brutal is the right word for what happened, even though nothing about it was cruel. Brutal doesn't require volume. It requires accuracy, patience, and the refusal to let anger blur the aim. You gave it exactly that, whether you meant to frame it that way or not, and the result speaks for itself in every conversation happening about this without you in the room. This is also why nobody can accuse you of overreacting. Overreaction requires excess, more force than the situation called for, something people can point to and say you took it too far. Precision doesn't leave room for that accusation, because every piece of it was already true before you ever addressed it. You didn't add anything. You didn't exaggerate anything. You simply stopped softening the truth for their comfort. And truth, delivered exactly as it is, has never once needed your help to feel like too much for the people who created it. Number 9. The empire built on your silence, collapsing in real time. For a long time, their entire position depended on one specific thing: your continued silence. As long as you stayed quiet, absorbed it, kept your head down, they could keep building whatever version of events served them best, brick by brick, on a foundation that only worked because you weren't correcting it. That's not an accident. That's how every narrative built on someone else's compliance works. It requires the wronged person to keep cooperating, even unintentionally, by never challenging the frame. The moment that cooperation ended, the entire structure lost its foundation, and nobody builds something that's sturdy, expecting the ground underneath it to disappear. They kept adding to the story, kept reinforcing it, kept recruiting more people into believing it, completely unaware that the whole thing was standing on something that had already quietly walked away. That's the part that must feel the most disorienting now, watching something they spent so long constructing come apart, not from an external attack, but from the simple absence of the compliance it always depended on. Picture a bridge that was never actually resting on solid ground, just on the assumption that nobody would ever look underneath it. For years, people cross it without a second thought, trusting that if it's still standing, it must be sound. Then one day, someone finally checks the foundation, and everyone who crossed that bridge has to reckon with exactly how much they trusted something that was never built to hold real weight in the first place. That's what's happening to them right now, in slow motion, in front of everyone who once stood on that bridge with them. Every person who repeated their version of events, every person who nodded along, is now quietly recalculating how much of what they believed was actually true, and that recalculation is happening whether or not you ever say another word about any of it. This is the part that makes it feel so complete. You didn't have to tear the structure down yourself. You just had to stop holding it up, and gravity did exactly what gravity always does to things that were never actually stable to begin with. That's not revenge in the way they imagined it. It's something far more permanent, because it can't be argued with, apologized away, or spun into a different story. It simply is what it always was, finally visible to everyone at once. What's almost funny, if any of this can be called funny, is how much energy they spent maintaining that bridge instead of just building something honest in the first place. Honest things don't need constant reinforcement. They don't require careful management of who talks to whom, or which version gets told to which audience. Only lies need that kind of upkeep, and the sheer exhaustion of that upkeep is probably part of why the whole thing finally gave out. It's hard to hold a structure together forever when the structure was never sound to begin with. Number 10. Why they can't fight back. Because there's nothing left standing to defend. Here's the part that's genuinely brutal for them to sit with. In most conflicts, there's something to fight for, some position to defend, some counter-narrative to push. What happens when there's nothing left? When the story has already been told, already been compared against itself, already collapsed under its own contradictions before they even realized the fight had started? You can't defend a position that's already gone. You can only stand in the wreckage, trying to figure out what's salvageable, and increasingly, the answer is not much. This is different from losing an argument. Losing an argument means there was still an argument to have. What they're experiencing is closer to watching the ground disappear beneath a position they thought was unshakable, with no clear moment to point to and say, this is where it went wrong, because it went wrong gradually, in 100 small places, none of which they can undo now that they've all connected. Imagine trying to patch a boat that's taking on water from so many different places at once that there aren't enough hands to cover every leak. You could plug one, but 3 more open while you're doing it. Eventually you stop trying to save the boat and start trying to figure out how to survive the sinking. That's the position they're in now, except the water isn't coming from an outside attack. It's coming from every inconsistency they created themselves, resurfacing all at once. This is why apologies started arriving, why sudden loyalty started appearing from people who'd been silent for months, why the whole tone around the situation shifted from confident to defensive to something closer to damage control. None of that is fighting back in any meaningful sense. It's triage, an attempt to salvage whatever relationships and reputation they can from a situation that's already been decided by the facts, not by you. You never had to land a final blow because there was no single moment where this ended. It's ending continuously, in every conversation happening without you, in every person quietly reconsidering what they believed, in every space where your name used to be a punchline and now sits in uncomfortable silence instead. That kind of ending doesn't need a dramatic final scene. It just needs time, and time has already done more damage than any confrontation ever could. There's something almost merciful about this kind of ending, even though it doesn't feel merciful to the people living through it. A single confrontation, however brutal, eventually ends. This doesn't. It keeps arriving in small doses, a comment here, a raised eyebrow there, a conversation that goes quiet the moment they walk into it. That drip-feed version of consequence tends to outlast the dramatic kind by months, sometimes years, because there's no single event to move on from. There's just a slow, permanent recalibration of how they're seen, one that resets itself every time someone new hears the story for the first time. Number 11. The reckoning they convinced themselves would never come. For a long time, they operated like people who genuinely believed there would be no consequences. And in fairness, for a while, they were right. Nothing happened. You stayed quiet. Life moved forward. That absence of immediate consequence taught them exactly the wrong lesson, that they could keep doing this indefinitely, that your restraint was permission, that the story they were telling would simply become the accepted version of events by default, because nobody was correcting it out loud. That's the mistake almost everyone in their position makes. They confuse delay with absence. They assume that because something hasn't happened yet, it isn't coming at all, without considering that some consequences take longer to arrive precisely because they're more thorough when they do. Quick consequences tend to be shallow, resolved fast, forgotten faster. Slow consequences, The kind that build across months while nobody's watching closely tend to be far more complete because they've had time to gather every piece of evidence instead of relying on a single dramatic moment. Picture someone standing on a shoreline, watching the tide pull back further than usual, mistaking that retreat for safety, for more room to build, more time to enjoy the exposed sand. They don't understand what that retreat actually means until the water returns all at once, reclaiming everything they thought they'd gained in the meantime. That withdrawal wasn't the ocean leaving, it was the ocean gathering itself. That's what your silence was actually doing this entire time, even if neither of you understood it that way while it was happening. It wasn't retreat, it was gathering. And now that the tide has come back in, it's reclaiming every inch of ground they thought they'd secured, all at once, with a completeness that a quicker, angrier response could never have achieved. They had months to prepare for this. They spent that time celebrating instead, and that miscalculation is now part of the story too. There's nothing satisfying about watching someone realize this too late to change it. It's not triumphant so much as it is simply final, the natural conclusion of a pattern they built and refused to examine while they still had the chance. You didn't create this reckoning. You just stopped protecting them from it, and the moment you did, it arrived exactly the way these things always do, later than they expected and far more completely. It's worth sitting with how much of your own energy went into that protection without you even realizing it at the time. Every time you softened the truth, gave them the benefit of the doubt in front of others, let a comment slide instead of correcting it, you were unknowingly buying them more time. That wasn't weakness on your part. It was decency, extended to people who never extended it back. The reckoning didn't arrive because you became cruel. It arrived because decency eventually runs out of reasons to keep covering for people who never once covered for you. Number 12. The version of you they still don't understand, even now. Even watching all of this unfold, there's a specific thing about you that they still haven't figured out, and it's the thing that makes this feel so unresolved for them, even as everything falls apart. They keep looking for the moment you decided to do this to them, the strategy session, the plan, the calculated decision to bring them down. It doesn't exist, because that was never what this was. You didn't orchestrate a downfall. You simply stopped absorbing the cost of protecting people who never protected you. That distinction matters more than they realize, because it means there's no plan to counter, no strategy to expose, no manipulation to call out, because none of that ever happened. What happened is far simpler and far harder for them to accept. The truth was always going to surface eventually, and the only thing standing between them and that outcome was your continued willingness to carry weight that was never yours to carry. Once you stopped, nature took its course. Think about water finding its level. Nobody accuses water of scheming when it flows downhill. It's simply doing what water does once nothing is holding it back anymore. That's closer to what actually happened here than any story about calculated revenge. You weren't the force that broke the dam. You were the thing that stopped rebuilding it every time it cracked. And eventually, dams that nobody's maintaining do exactly what dams do when the pressure finally exceeds what they were built to hold. This is the part that will probably follow them the longest, longer than the immediate fallout, longer than the awkward silence in rooms that used to laugh at your expense. It's the unsettling realization that they were never actually up against you in any conventional sense. They were up against the truth the entire time, and you were simply the person who stopped standing in front of it on their behalf. That's a much harder thing to make peace with than being beaten by an enemy. An enemy can be blamed, resented, turned into a villain in the story they tell themselves later. The truth can't be villainized the same way, not convincingly, not for long. And that's exactly why this version of consequence the quiet, patient, undramatic kind, ends up being the one people never fully recover from. Give it time, and you'll notice something else too. The people who really understand what happened won't need it explained to them, and the people who will never understand it wouldn't believe the explanation anyway. You don't need to convince either group. The ones who matter already see it clearly, and the ones who don't were never going to be fair to you, no matter how much proof you handed them. That's not a loss. That's just clarity about where your energy was always better spent. Number 13. What happens now that the story belongs to you? Here's where this actually lands, chosen one. Not in some dramatic final showdown, not in a moment where they finally say everything you once wanted to hear. It lands in something quieter and, honestly, more valuable than any apology could ever be. The story stopped being theirs to control. For a long time, they got to decide what version of events people believed, what version of you people saw, what narrative filled the space where the truth should have been. That control is gone now, and it isn't coming back, no matter how many new versions of the story they try to build. You don't have to manage what happens next. You don't have to correct every remaining rumor, or respond to every late apology, or explain yourself to people who are only now catching up to something you understood a long time ago. The work that needed to happen already happened, mostly without your direct involvement, in conversations you weren't part of, among people slowly putting pieces together on their own. That's not something you need to finish. It's already finishing itself. Picture a garden that was neglected and overrun for a long time, until one day, someone simply stops fighting the weeds and lets the actual roots underneath do what they were always capable of doing, once given room to grow. That's closer to what's happening now than any image of destruction. This isn't rubble, it's clearing space, and clearing space is always the first part of something new being able to grow. Whether or not the people who trampled that garden ever understand what they lost in the process. What comes next for them isn't really your concern anymore, and that's exactly the point. Their reckoning is theirs to sit with, their relationships to rebuild or not rebuild, their reputation to salvage or fail to salvage. None of that requires anything further from you. You've already done the only thing that was ever actually yours to do, which was stop carrying weight that belonged to someone else, and let the rest happen on its own timeline instead of yours. This is what people mean when they talk about consequences that don't need revenge to feel complete. Nothing about this required you to become someone else, to get loud, to get cruel, to become the villain in someone else's story just to prove a point. You stayed exactly who you were, and that, more than anything you could have said or done, is what turned out to be unbearable for the people who were counting on you to become smaller instead. That's worth repeating because it's easy to miss in the middle of everything that's happened. They didn't just lose an argument or a friendship or a reputation. They lost the ability to shrink you, and that was always the actual goal underneath everything else they did. Every rumor, every cold shoulder, every quiet exclusion was an attempt to make you smaller, easier to manage, easier to dismiss. None of it worked. And now, the story that's left standing isn't about what they did to you. It's about what they couldn't do, no matter how long they tried. Number 14. This isn't the end. It's just the part where you stop watching the door. There's a version of this story that would end with you still checking over your shoulder, still bracing for the next attack, still treating peace like something temporary that could be taken away at any moment. That's not where this ends, chosen one, and it's worth saying clearly. You don't owe anyone continued vigilance for a war that's already been decided. You're allowed to actually exhale now. You're allowed to stop rehearsing your defense for conversations that are never going to happen because there's nothing left for anyone to argue with you about. What happened here wasn't just consequence landing on the people who earned it. It was proof of something about you that no amount of lying, isolating, or mocking was ever able to change. You didn't need to become cruel to survive this. You didn't need to abandon who you are to come out the other side intact. That matters more than any of the fallout they're currently dealing with, because reputations can be rebuilt and rumors eventually fade. But the kind of steadiness you showed through all of this, that's not something anyone can take from you again, no matter what they try next. Imagine someone who spent a storm standing perfectly still while everything around them was uprooted, not because they were frozen, but because they trusted their own footing more than they feared the wind. When the storm passes, that person doesn't need to check whether they're still standing. They already know that's where you are right now, even if it doesn't fully feel like it yet. The wind has moved on to somewhere else, and you're still exactly where you were, just with a much clearer view of who actually stayed and who was only ever waiting for a convenient exit. And maybe that's the actual definition of brutal that fits this story best. Not cruelty, not spectacle, just the simple, undeniable fact that you outlasted every single thing they threw at you without becoming any of the things they needed you to become in order to feel justified. They needed you bitter, and you weren't. They needed you desperate, and you weren't. They needed you to prove them right, and instead, you proved them wrong in the most complete way possible, by simply continuing to exist, unshaken, exactly as yourself, long after they assumed you'd have nothing left. This is your closing chapter with them, whether or not they ever fully understand what happened or why. You don't need their understanding. You don't need their apology to arrive in the shape you once imagined it would. What you needed was for the truth to stop depending on your silence to survive, and that already happened. Everything since then has just been the world catching up to something you knew a long time before anyone else was willing to admit it. Somewhere down the line, someone new will ask you about it, and you won't need to perform outrage or relive every detail to make them understand. You'll say what happened, plainly, without decoration, and they'll believe you, because the story no longer needs your emotion to hold it up. It holds itself up now. That's the real difference between where you started this and where you're standing at the end of it. You went from needing to be believed to simply being correct. And correct doesn't need convincing. It just needs time to be recognized, and time already did its part. If this message found you exactly when you needed it, drop 77 in the comments, so the next person scrolling past knows this story is real, and knows their own version of this reckoning is already further along than they think. Like this video, subscribe if you're not already part of this family, and share it with someone who's still waiting for their turn to stop watching the door. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.